Hello everyone and welcome to DNQ Football. We're back again. Today we are to talk about Oceania, the OFC region. Once again, because there has finally, Ryan, been a development. And I am hopefully here to answer all of your questions. Ryan, you're here to ask those all-important questions this evening.
Yep, I am indeed. Now, we are doing a pretty quick-fire video on this, aren't we, Tomo? Where we thought we'd kind of host this in a weird, well, not weird, but like a Q&A sort of format. I'll ask the questions, you'll answer them. So it's a little bit of a one-stop shop for anyone wanting to know what the situation is with the Oceania region 2022 World Cup qualification. So I think to start us off, Tom, first question, which national teams are competing in this qualification?
It's a very, very good question, a very important question. Of course, there's a plethora of nations in Oceania, but not all of them are FIFA registered. So nations like Kiribati, Micronesia, etc., the Marshall Islands, they're not FIFA registered, so they aren't part of this, which is the most important thing to start with. There are, however, 11 FIFA registered teams in the OFC region. For this tournament, however, there are only 9. The 9 are the Cook Islands, Tonga, Papua New Guinea, Vanuatu, Fiji, Tahiti, New Caledonia, Solomon Islands and New Zealand. And I've listed those off very helpfully for you in world ranking order. But
that is extremely helpful indeed. I think you're about to jump in and answer the question I was about to ask you.
You're going to ask me, why are there 9 and not 11? And you're also wondering, who are these other 2 nations that I haven't included? Well, they are Samoa and American Samoa. The 2 nations, unfortunately for them, they're not competing because of travel restrictions still imposed due to the pandemic. It's unfortunate. Obviously, we'll get on to when and where. None of these nations were able to host the tournament. No governing body in any of these nations permitted the hosting of these tournaments, but most of them did allow the squads to travel. Unfortunately, American Samoa and Samoa have rejected that as well. So those 2 nations will not participate.
That is a real pity. That segues really nicely on to the next question. Where is this qualification being held, Tom?
Well, this is going to be very different from every other World Cup qualification that we've seen in history, actually, let alone this year's qualification for next year's Qatar World Cup. Of course, it's the first World Cup in winter, and it's been a trailblazer of World Cups for many reasons, and partly due to the pandemic. But what we're about to see is a mini tournament, a preliminary tournament, if you will, that's played out in the host nation of Qatar, which is going to be very interesting. There's a number of things as to why. Number one, this tournament is going to be played between the 14th and the 30th of March next year. That does not entirely coincide with the international break. So players from New Zealand, such as Chris Wood, will miss a few of the games to start with because he will still be at Burnley unless Burnley decide to release him. For example, there's others like Sarpreet Singh and Kakache, for example, that play in European leagues. What's also interesting is that there's quite a big time difference between the 2 regions, and there's also a huge difference in the climate, in the humidity. And my final point on the main differences of this tournament being hosted in Doha primarily, but in Qatar as a whole, as opposed to these countries, is the quality of the pitches. We are led to believe that these games will be played in the stadiums, another test of the stadiums.
Really?
And that's what we're led to believe at the moment. And of course, this will be very different, particularly for sides such as Tonga and the Cook Islands, who, of course, as I'm sure we're about to get onto, will play in the very, very first game of this tournament.
Again, God, you keep teeing them up for me, my friend. My next question. Let's talk about this qualification and the formalities of it. What's the format?
What is the format? Well, as I've said already, there's 9 teams participating, and that doesn't very neatly go into groups. So, FIFA and OFC have agreed that there will be a preliminary match, a head-to-head, one shootout game between the currently unranked Cook Islands, because they've been inactive for so long, and 199th place Tonga. Personally, I think that's a tiny bit generous on Tonga, that there are 199 in the world. And what will be really interesting is, should Tonga win this, there is a chance that the Cook Islands become re-ranked and could knock San Marino off of bottom spot, of course. But all this stuff yet to come. It's a shootout game. Those two sides will be whittled down to 1. There will then be 8 teams. But before that game's even played, tomorrow, the 30th of November, the groups are drawn. There are 2 groups of 4 teams. One of them will say the Cook Islands or Tonga, and of course that game will then be whittled down at the start of the tournament. It will be very upsetting for that country who will have travelled all that way and only play 1 game. But for whoever wins that game and the other sides in the group, they will play a World Cup group style round robin in the groups of 4. So if you exclude the preliminary game, each team will play 3 games. Just play the other teams in the group once, as we've seen with lots of tournaments recently. The top 2 from each group, so the 8 will then go down to 4. Those 4 teams, winner will play runner-up, winner will play runner-up in semi-finals that then go to a final. And of course, the winner of that final then goes into the Inter-Confed playoff. So, this tournament, the most important thing, single games only. Anything can happen on a football pitch in 90 minutes. We all know who we think the winner's going to be, but round-robin single fixtures in a ridiculously condensed tournament with, I believe, between most games, just 2 days between games.
Incredible. Incredible. As you've said, the single match format in the group stages, anything can happen. At D&Q over March, we will be covering this in extreme detail. We're a lover of Minnow Nations. That tournament is all about the Minnow Nations. I guess up against the might of New Zealand to a certain extent. Anything can happen. We're extremely looking forward to it. Tom, is there anything else to add about the Oceania World Cup 2022 qualification?
The final point, well, actually 2 points. One, I'm going to completely agree with what you've just said. You know, we know that there's sides out there like Fiji who have Krishna up front. You know, there's no doubt that every team that plays New Zealand is going to set up defensively and try and spring on the counter. Some sides are going to be better than others, but you've got Papua New Guinea. You've got Fiji, you've got the Solomon Islands, teams with a bit of attacking flair here, and it will be interesting to see in a single leg game what happens. My final point though, whoever wins this tournament, they're not through just yet, because Oceania only gets 0.5 spaces and they will play an interconfederational playoff. The draw for that, in terms of who will play who region-wise, has been made, and of course the OFC side will play the side in CONCACAF. Now, if it were to be stopped right now this second, it would be Panama. However, it could be Mexico, it could be the US, it could be Canada. It's an off chance it's Jamaica. It's highly likely to be one of the sides that's currently in the top 4. That, even for New Zealand, is a big, big ask, I must say. But we're always a fan of the Minnow Nations. We're delighted. I'm delighted that this has all been resolved. I can't wait for it. And one thing that you as viewers and lovers of the OFC region can expect as well is reaction to the draw and a little bit of a build-up of what you can expect from one of the Minnow Nation sides, because we can announce that we have Papua New Guinea defender Alwyn Comalong coming on the show at some point across the next few months prior to those World Cup qualifications to chat through his opinion, what he thinks about how the whole thing has been set up and what he hopes his nation can achieve. Lots and lots coming on D&Q Football.